The most dangerous place for a beautiful woman in Gilded Age America wasn't a dark alley or a rough neighbourhood. It was a yacht party filled with wealthy gentlemen competing for her attention. High society gatherings might have featured crystal champagne flutes and string quartets, but they operated by rules more ruthless than any criminal underworld. When aristocratic men discovered they couldn't purchase the one thing they truly wanted, their response often made street thugs look positively civilized by comparison. The combination of unlimited resources, scientific knowledge, and wounded pride created a toxic mixture that could destroy lives with surgical precision. One woman learned that choosing love over money in these circles doesn't just mean giving up luxury. It means becoming the unwitting centre of a revenge plot, so elaborate it would have impressed medieval poisoners. Her romantic decisions would ultimately expose how thin the veneer of civilization becomes when privilege meets rejection. In today's episode of Old Money Allure, I'll take you through a love story that became a masterclass in how wealth and jealousy can turn deadly. On a sun-drenched afternoon in 1897, aboard the luxurious yacht Monhegan, cruising the pristine waters off Maine's coast, a chance encounter would set in motion a chain of events culminating in double murder, and one of America's most notorious criminal trials. Blanche Chesebrough, an enchanting, aspiring opera singer from Lebanon, Pennsylvania, possessed the rare combination of breathtaking beauty and genuine musical talent that made her the centre of attention wherever New York's social elite gathered. Born around 1874 to James Francis Chesebrough and Harriet Newell Crumb, she had arrived in Manhattan with dreams of operatic stardom, performing with the Musical Arts Society at the prestigious Carnegie Hall despite her family's modest financial circumstances. Though contemporary critics suggested her vocal abilities were somewhat limited, her ethereal presence and captivating stage manner had already begun opening doors among the city's cultural patrons who appreciated both her artistic aspirations and her striking appearance. At that fateful Maine yachting party, she met Roland Burnham Molineux, heir to one of Brooklyn's most distinguished families and son of Civil War General Edward Leslie Molineux, whose military service had elevated the family to prominence within New York's established society. Roland, born in 1866, represented everything that Gilded Age America celebrated: wealth, breeding, education, and social connections that opened every door in the city's most exclusive circles. His residence at the family's fashionable Fort Greene address at 117 Fort Greene Place reflected their status among Brooklyn's aristocratic families, while his membership in Manhattan's prestigious Knickerbocker Athletic Club provided entree to the city's most influential gentlemen. Working as a chemist at his father's successful paint company, F.W. DeVoe and C.T. Reynolds, Roland possessed specialized knowledge of exotic chemicals and rare compounds used in manufacturing processes, expertise that would later prove devastatingly significant. His access to dangerous substances like cyanide of mercury, routinely employed in paint production, distinguished him from typical wealthy young men who dabbled in business without acquiring technical skills. Roland's lifestyle epitomized turn-of-the-century privilege: summers yachting in Bar Harbor, winters attending exclusive social functions, and year-round participation in the rarefied world of Manhattan's elite clubs and societies. When he introduced Blanche to his close friend Henry Crossman Barnett at various Knickerbocker Club gatherings, Roland inadvertently orchestrated what would become his own romantic undoing. Barnett, a 32-year-old stockbroker with offices at 19 Broad Street, possessed the kind of charm and worldly sophistication that immediately captivated the beautiful singer. Described as having brown hair, blue eyes, and a neatly trimmed moustache complementing what observers delicately termed a decided paunch, Barnett had joined the athletic club, hoping to improve his physical condition, but instead discovered something infinitely more compelling. The attraction between Blanche and Henry was instantaneous and overwhelming, transforming Roland's trusted friend into his most dangerous rival. Blanche would later describe Henry's influence over her as irresistible, recalling how he had swept me off my feet from their very first meeting. Their relationship quickly deepened beyond mere flirtation, becoming an intimate connection that would ultimately seal Henry's fate while binding Blanche to a nightmare from which she would struggle to escape. October 1898 brought a pivotal moment that would transform romantic disappointment into murderous obsession when Roland Molineux, confident in his wealth and social position, formally proposed marriage to Blanche Chesebrough. His proposal represented more than romantic desire. It embodied the entitled expectation of a man accustomed to acquiring whatever he coveted through the simple application of privilege and financial resources. Roland's shock was profound when Blanche rejected his offer with devastating directness, declaring without equivocation that her heart belonged entirely to Henry Barnet. For a man raised to believe that his aristocratic heritage and substantial fortune guaranteed success in all endeavours, this rejection struck at the very foundation of his identity and self-worth. The humiliation festered within Roland's mind, transforming wounded pride into something far more sinister as he contemplated the unthinkable reality that his closest friend had succeeded where he had failed. Late in October 1898, Henry Barnet received what appeared to be a routine promotional sample at his Knickerbocker Athletic Club address. A small tin of Kutnow's improved effervescent powder marketed as a harmless digestive remedy. Such unsolicited samples were commonplace among pharmaceutical companies seeking to introduce their products to potential customers, making the package seem entirely unremarkable. On October 28th, Henry consumed a dose of the powder, expecting nothing more than possible relief from digestive discomfort that might assist his ongoing efforts to reduce his weight. Instead of improvement, he experienced the onset of violent illness that would persist with increasing severity until his death on November 10th, 1898, just 13 days after taking the fatal dose. During his agonizing final weeks, Henry mentioned to his attending physician, Dr. Henry Beeman Douglas, the mysterious powder he had received, providing a crucial detail that would later expose the murder plot. Dr. Douglas initially diagnosed the death as cardiac asthenia induced by diphtheric poisoning, a misattribution that allowed the crime to remain undetected for months. The symptoms of mercury poisoning closely resembled diphtheria in certain stages, creating plausible medical cover for what was actually deliberate assassination. However, Dr. Douglas had retained the powder container, and subsequent chemical analysis revealed the presence of cyanide of mercury, a rare poison accessible to someone with Roland's specialized knowledge of industrial chemicals. When authorities later exhumed Henry's body on February 28, 1899, tissue analysis confirmed the presence of the deadly compound, establishing definitive proof of murder. Remarkably, just 8 days after Henry's death, Roland again proposed to Blanche, perhaps calculating that her romantic dreams now necessarily involved him rather than her deceased lover. Whether motivated by grief, shock, or pragmatic recognition that her artistic ambitions required financial backing, Blanche accepted his second proposal. Their wedding took place on November 29, 1898, a mere 19 days after Henry's funeral, timing that would later appear damning to investigators and prosecutors. The unseemly haste suggested to authorities that Roland had eliminated his romantic rival specifically to clear his path to Blanche's hand, transforming murder into a calculated courtship strategy. Blanche's transformation from aspiring opera singer to Mrs. Roland Molineux elevated her social status dramatically, but it also made her an unwitting participant in what prosecutors would characterize as premeditated murder. Their marriage celebration marked not a romantic triumph, but the successful conclusion of Roland's first act of revenge, setting the stage for even deadlier schemes targeting those who had crossed his path. While Roland's marriage to Blanche provided the romantic satisfaction he had sought through murder, his social relationships continued deteriorating due to his consuming hatred for Harry Seymour Cornish, athletic director of the Knickerbocker Club. Their antagonism had grown so intense that Roland had resigned his membership in 1897 when fellow members refused to dismiss Cornish, whom he publicly denounced as fundamentally unsuitable for his position. Roland's objections seemed rooted in class prejudice, viewing Cornish as representing unwelcome working-class intrusion into spaces traditionally reserved for society's elite. The holiday season of 1898 would provide Roland with an opportunity to settle this festering grievance through methods he had already proven devastatingly effective. On December 23rd, Harry Cornish received what appeared to be an elegant Christmas gift at the Knickerbocker Athletic Club, a package that would soon demonstrate Roland's escalating boldness in pursuing his vendettas. The beautifully presented box from Tiffany & Company contained a silver toothpick holder accompanied by a bottle labelled Emerson's Bromo Seltzer, seemingly an authentic headache remedy. Unknown to Cornish, sophisticated chemical analysis would later reveal that the bottle contained legitimate bromo seltzer powder, carefully mixed with lethal quantities of cyanide of mercury. This deadly preparation required both access to rare poisons and sufficient chemical knowledge to create an undetectable mixture, capabilities that Roland's professional background provided in abundance. Cornish brought the gift home to his shared lodgings with 62-year-old Catherine Adams, his distant cousin, and her daughter Florence, establishing an innocent household as the setting for Roland's next murderous scheme. The morning of December 28th brought Catherine Adams a severe headache that would tragically become her final earthly suffering. When Florence suggested using the bromo seltzer that Cornish had received as a gift, Catherine gratefully accepted what appeared to be standard household medicine. Cornish prepared the fatal dose by mixing a heaping teaspoonful of the powder with water, creating the concoction that would end an innocent woman's life within minutes of consumption. Catherine drank the entire mixture, trusting completely in what seemed like ordinary headache relief. Almost immediately she began experiencing violent reactions that brought screams, attracting the entire household, as the poison began its deadly work. The mixture reportedly emitted an almond-like odour characteristic of cyanide poisoning, though this warning sign went unrecognised by those desperately trying to help her. Medical assistance arrived quickly, but Catherine Adams died shortly after the doctor's arrival, becoming an unintended victim of Roland's murderous campaign against Harry Cornish. Cornish himself tasted the mixture and fell ill, but prompt medical intervention by Dr. Hitchcock, who recognised cyanide poisoning symptoms, saved his life through rapid administration of antidotes. The cruel irony was unmistakable. Roland had succeeded in committing murder, but had killed an innocent elderly woman rather than his intended target. This case of mistaken victimhood would ultimately strengthen the prosecution's case by demonstrating Roland's callous disregard for innocent life in pursuing his personal vendettas. The Christmas gift had delivered death instead of holiday cheer, transforming what should have been a season of celebration into a tragedy that would soon expose Roland's murderous obsessions to the full scrutiny of American justice. Catherine Adams's senseless death marked the moment when Roland's private grievances became public crimes that would ultimately destroy his carefully constructed life of privilege and respectability. Captain McCluskey assumed command of the investigation on December 29, 1898, immediately focusing on Harry Cornish as the intended victim and seeking suspects with both motive and means for such sophisticated poisoning. Investigators quickly identified Roland Molineux as their prime suspect based on compelling circumstantial evidence. His public feud with Cornish, his expert knowledge of exotic chemicals, his employment at a facility using cyanide of mercury, and his customer account at Tiffany where the silver toothpick holder originated. The prosecution constructed their case around cutting-edge handwriting analysis, summoning over a dozen expert witnesses to testify that identical penmanship appeared on address labels for both the Cutnow powder sent to Barnett and the Bromo Seltzer package delivered to Cornish. This forensic evidence, though later questioned for reliability, represented the most advanced investigative techniques available and formed the centerpiece of what prosecutors believed was an unassailable case. Roland's arrest on February 27, 1899, followed a coroner's inquest into Catherine Adams's death that had successfully connected her murder to Henry Barnett's earlier poisoning, revealing a pattern of calculated killing. The subsequent trial, beginning in November 1899 and concluding in February 1900, became the longest and most expensive criminal proceeding in New York history, captivating national attention. Media coverage reached unprecedented levels as newspapers engaged in fierce competition for the most sensational reporting, with the New York World and New York Journal leading the charge in what became known as yellow journalism. Prosecutor James W. Osborne built his strategy around circumstantial evidence and scientific testimony, controversially introducing details about Henry Barnett's death to establish Roland's pattern of behaviour and demonstrate clear motive. The defence team, led by George Gordon Battle and Bartow Weeks, employed the startling strategy of presenting no witnesses or evidence, declaring simply that the prosecution has failed to establish its charge. This calculated gamble aimed to highlight weaknesses in the circumstantial case while avoiding any testimony that might provide additional ammunition for prosecutors. On February 10, 1900, the jury convicted Roland of first-degree murder, sentencing him to death and making him one of Sing Sing's most notorious death row inmates. While awaiting execution, Roland authored The Room with the Little Door, a haunting memoir of death row existence that criticised the criminal justice system while revealing unexpected depth and humanity. His literary efforts demonstrated intellectual capabilities that contradicted public perceptions of him as merely a pampered aristocrat, showing genuine empathy for fellow condemned prisoners from vastly different social backgrounds. On October 15, 1901, the New York Court of Appeals delivered a landmark reversal that would reshape American criminal law for generations. The appellate court ruled that introducing evidence about Henry Barnett's death violated fundamental principles of presumed innocence, since Roland had never been formally charged with that crime. This decision established the Molineux rule, strengthening defendants' rights by prohibiting prosecutors from introducing evidence of uncharged crimes to support their cases. Roland's second trial began on October 13, 1902, with the prosecution significantly weakened by the exclusion of prejudicial evidence about Barnett's murder. After deliberating for merely 13 minutes, the jury acquitted Roland on November 11, 1902, suggesting that circumstantial evidence alone was insufficient to establish guilt beyond reasonable doubt. The swift acquittal demonstrated how the appellate court's decision had fundamentally altered the case's dynamics, transforming what seemed like certain conviction into rapid exoneration. One week after Roland's acquittal, Blanche filed for divorce in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, on November 18, 1902, citing mental cruelty as grounds for dissolving their scandal-scarred marriage. Her timing indicated careful planning, waiting until legal proceedings concluded before taking action that might have complicated Roland's defense or forced her testimony against him. The divorce proceedings in September 1903 officially ended a union that had begun with murder and been sustained through years of imprisonment, trials, and public humiliation. Within 2 months of gaining her freedom, Blanche married Wallace D. Scott, the attorney who had represented her in the divorce, choosing both practical security and genuine affection over her traumatic past. Scott offered respectability and stability that her notorious first marriage had obliterated, providing sanctuary from the relentless publicity that had transformed her from unknown singer into America's most talked-about woman. Blanche attempted returning to entertainment in 1905, planning a vaudeville career under the name Blanche Chesebrough Molineux. But Roland's legal threats over unauthorized use of his surname forced abandonment of her theatrical dreams. This final cruel irony demonstrated how their connection continued haunting her even after divorce, effectively destroying her last hope of reclaiming the artistic career that had originally brought her to New York. Following this setback, Blanche deliberately retreated from public attention, living quietly until her death in 1954 at age 80. Her conscious withdrawal from society reflected determination to escape the notoriety that had made her a household name throughout America during the early 1900s. Roland attempted rebuilding his shattered life, marrying Margaret Connell in a New York courthouse ceremony on November 7, 1913. But years of imprisonment and scandal had severely damaged his mental stability. He continued writing after his release, publishing short stories in major newspapers and crafting a play titled The Man Inside, based on his prison experiences. However, the psychological strain of attempting to stage his theatrical work overwhelmed his already fragile mental condition. On September 7, 1914, Roland was committed to an asylum following a series of devastating mental breakdowns that rendered him incapable of caring for himself. Medical authorities diagnosed his condition as paresis, a form of neurosyphilis, causing progressive mental deterioration often associated with the dissolute lifestyle he had pursued in his youth. Roland died in institutional care on November 2, 1917, at age 51, his brilliant mind destroyed by disease that had slowly consumed his cognitive abilities. The Molineux case established enduring legal precedents still cited in modern criminal trials, including recent high-profile cases involving similar issues of prejudicial evidence. For American society, the trial represented a watershed moment, demonstrating that wealth and privilege could not ultimately shield individuals from justice when their crimes shocked the public conscience. Blanche's story serves as a haunting reminder of how romantic choices can entangle innocent people in webs of violence beyond their control or comprehension. Her 50-year retreat from public life following the trials suggests the profound psychological scars left by her unwitting participation in one of America's most sensational criminal cases. The tragedy illustrates how quickly promising lives can be destroyed when love becomes tangled with jealousy, privilege, and the deadly capabilities of those who refuse to accept rejection. And now I'd like to see you in the comments. Do you believe Blanche was simply an unlucky victim of two men's deadly rivalry, or should she bear some responsibility for the tragic consequences of her romantic entanglements? I can't wait to hear your thoughts, and thanks for joining me for another episode of Old Money Allure. Cheers.